Good evening and welcome to you all joining the third talk in the series Open for Discussion organized by the Curatorial Research Collective CRC on a diverse and inclusive architecture. My name is Justin Agyin and our talk today is called Reframing Architecture Education, in which we will specifically focus on cultural and ethnic diversity in architecture education and how this could serve as an invitation to question the frames of reference on which architecture education is based. And in so, we aim to talk about strategies and methods of teaching to understand architecture from a multitude of ethnic and cultural perspectives. And when considering architecture education as the basis from which people develop themselves into practicing architects, scholars, and teachers, and consider universities as places where the future is envisioned, the search and need for diversity in architecture education becomes evident. In this slide, existing curricula, the frames of reference they are built upon, the tools and instruments they offer, and the embedded norms, values, and narratives need to be readdressed. And to discuss this, we have invited three architects and educators, Carlos Weber, Pnina, Avidar, and Nathalie Frankowski. However, Carlos Weber is unfortunately not able to join us tonight, but Pnina and Nathalie are here, and I will introduce them further along to accompany their short introduction. But first, I would like to address that for those of you joining us on Zoom, feel free to post questions in the Q&A box throughout the sessions, and we aim to address them towards the end of the talk. So, to start off, I would like to introduce Pnina Avidar, who is an architect and writer based in Amsterdam and owner of 12 PM Architecture. She is head of the architecture program at the Fontys Academy for Architecture and Urbanism in Tilburg and is involved in various multidisciplinary activities relating to design research. She has been editor of Oase Journal for Architecture, is co-founder of NL Root and is partner at VAVA, an association of independent professionals committed to spatial solutions and social empowerment. Welcome, Pnina, and thank you for joining us. And please take you along with your story. Should I start sharing the image you sent me, or?
Please.
Yes, okay. Yes, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin, first of all, for including me in this inclusive session. It's a great honor for me to be able to share with you some of my thoughts and the work we're doing at the Academy. And I hope this will result in an education that is targeted towards everybody. I chose to share with you, first of all, a small image about what is being considered as the territory of the architects nowadays. It's not so defined as it used to be as the person or the persons that design a building and also take care that it will be realized. It is a bit stretched out. And architects are involved in technology, in education, in the building industry, urbanism, marketing, communication, you name it, of governance. So it's quite difficult as a head of an architectural program to target the studies, because what should one do in order to take care that a person that is graduated from the study can do all this? And maybe more. So that is maybe not directed towards inclusion specifically and diversity, but it shows the diversity of the work that an architect does or can do when graduated. I included also a small observation I made about what in my perspective, architectural design education has to target and what are the challenges that are awaiting us. I won't bother reading it because I kind of assume you can read by yourself. I just want to say that what is the core of our program at the Academy is that we are propelled by the wish to contribute to the education of a critical, creative, engaged, and proactive person. And this is what we are trying to do during 4 years in which students work and study. It's a special form of education. It's not like other forms that you know, a master program. And I say this is forming the base of our deeds and our program. And to be more specific, I would like to say that what we are trying to do is that we try to develop in people or in our students the need or the ability to be able to move beyond themselves, beyond their personal experience or individual experience, and to become the other. And to try to operate from that perspective, the perspective of the other. And I think I will stop right now and let Nathalie go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pnina, for your interesting insights and introduction. Already finding, I think, a few key points that we can talk further about later on. Then I would like to introduce Nathalie Frankowski, who is a curator, author, poet, educator, and artist. In 2008, she co-founded with Cruz Garcia Why Architecture think tank in Brussels to contribute to the collective intelligence of architecture. The office has designed, amongst others, the National Center for Contemporary Art in Moscow and the design of the creative offices. Besides architectural design, Frankowski and Garcia do research in various ways, resulting in recent publications as a manual of anti-racist architecture education and narrative architecture, a clinical manifesto. And she is currently also assistant professor at the School of Architecture and Design at Virginia Polytechnic and State University of Virginia Tech, and visiting lecturer at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to a conversation between all us three. So, yeah, I think if you have an image to share, I just wanted to talk briefly of kind of two different recent projects we have done that really came as a reaction to both the alienation that the world was going through with the pandemic, that was really strong in particular for students around the world, but also about the social unrest that is constant, and especially the lack of permeability of these topics in the education of architecture. So the first project I wanted to mention is the Manual of Anti-Racist Architecture Education. That really started because it was born out of our own frustration of seeing a lack of actions and real discussion within the institution, and also a personal need to lay out, to map, to name all the different historical and systemic mechanisms that allow architecture and architecture education to be complacent in that and to be quite hermetic. We also wanted to start to think about different tools we could develop to try to articulate a real intersectional approach to architecture pedagogy that could challenge the kind of monodiscourses that are in place and offer the beginning of a more inclusive, radical, accessible, contextualizing approach to the exchange of knowledges and architecture education. We really like a quote of Enrique Dussel, who affirms that, you don't teach ethics, you practice it. So we kind of take it and we think anti-racism is not just taught, it has to be practiced. So to deal with architecture is also kind of to confront all the processes of planning and constructing the ways in which we live together, but also kind of denunciating the ways in which it's kind of compartmentalized, regulate, and segregated populations too. So in a way, for us, it's really important to acknowledge that architecture affects everybody. So a radical and abolitionist pedagogy of architecture must really embrace all the people. So not just the people who are officially trained as architects. So it's important for us also to think of different kinds of tools that we can use, if it's a manual or later when I will introduce Loud Reader, to kind of broaden the discussion and try to bring more people in the conversation. So we believe that an anti-racist pedagogy of architecture is not only about the political and ideological content embedded in the syllabus of the design studios, the critical content of a history of theory seminar, or the emancipating potential that technical knowledge can bring, but also about the interpersonal relations, radically inclusive learning spaces, and concrete institutional and anti-institutional approaches. So we divided the manual in 3 parts. The first part of our manual is called Before School, where we discuss the problems regarding the access to architecture education. So in our case, this part was more focused on our context, which is the USA, because also highlighting like the role of universities as a tool of land occupation, gentrification, settler colonialism, and racial oppression. Our second part was called In School, and we developed the anti-racist spiral of architecture education that you can see also in the slide. And it's a diagram that could be used as a toolkit somehow. So we wanted to question structural forms of knowledges while proposing other epistemologies, platforms, methods, strategy, and voices. So the idea was to create this kind of open spiral form where histories, theories, and media are intersected through the centers of anti-racism, anti-ableism, transfeminism, anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, and ecological justice, in order to really challenge and imagine a form of architectural pedagogy. Our third part of the manual was called After School, and we introduced an essay called On Making Architecture, an anti-racist architecture manifesto, where we try to delve into the many different ways that architecture has been historically complicit in the perpetuation of racism. The second project I just want to introduce is the one below. That was like a creation of an online platform that we named Loud Readers. And this platform was inspired by the lecturess, and more particularly by Luisa Capetillo, who was a feminist, anarcho-syndicalist, writer, and poet, who would read out loud to the workers in the tobacco factories in the beginning of the 20th century and create a new form of education by sharing knowledges, reading sources of information, but also kind of foster a call for other imaginaries. So we see this platform as like an alternative trade school, and we try to offer like what we call a planetary curriculum with a lot of archival material. So the platform is still growing. So we have a lot of different contributors coming every month now. And we want to share like conceptual, but also practical knowledge, references, and practices that are kind of centered around themes of anti-racism, anti-capitalism, and anti-colonialism. So the online platform is conceived at different sessions where we welcome different authors, designers, creators, architects, poets, cultural researchers, educators, and thinkers around the world. And we try also to have it as open as possible. So it's always accessible online to have like a more international audience. And each guest comes and can read out loud a text that allows them to discuss different contexts of critical literature and other projects of emancipation including decolonial, transfeminist, anarchist, and abolitionist literature. And the online platform is also for us like a way to archive all this that is happening. So it has workshops, videos, text reading, how-to workshops, with a hope that all this can be accessible to a larger public. So then also to open, as I mentioned before, to try to open the discussion around architecture and pedagogy in architecture.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nathalie. Also, very interesting things that you mentioned. Maybe to tie into the second project you introduced. So if I understand correctly, it's also a form of open and sort of decentralized way of learning, if I'm correct.
Yes, definitely. And what was really interesting for us is, again, like, because you know, questioning the archive is kind of building care somehow. So there's like this offer that is always speaking about it, and how can we make this archive accessible? And I think that's a way to kind of challenge all the kind of set networks of knowledge that are already existing, and kind of have this kind of more alternative resources that can come directly from people who work with it so much. And also that, yeah, always this idea, and I think that's also comes with really the figure of Luisa Capetillo and what they were doing in the tobacco factories, in a way that it's question of access of knowledge. And I think that's also like very fundamental when we want to challenge the question of pedagogy in architecture.
Yes, yes. And Pnina, maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on how things work in Tilburg, for instance. I saw what I found interesting is that collaboration, for instance, is one of the 7 crucial competences besides design, research, and entrepreneurial skills, for instance. Why is that? Hey, you're still muted.
I'm mute. That's not the intention. I first have to illustrate a little bit the context, so you will, for the people that are not, that don't know something about the academy, because as I said, our students work and study, and they get credits for their work. And their intention is then to become architects. And in order to become an architect in the Netherlands, to be able to enlist in the architecture register, you have to, you have to prove your abilities. So this is kind of a restricting context when it comes to very certain, or to certain pedagogies. So literature is very interesting, but the place for it in the academy, when training the designers, is very minimal. So I think this balance has to be taken in consideration when you kind of compare systems. And yeah, I am part of the system. I'm sorry, part of the system. So I want to tell something more about our school. The staff that is running the school, these are 6 people. Half of them are women. 2/3 of the women are not from Dutch origin and are not Christian. So I think that's a good and interesting thing for the discussion. And approximately 50% of our students' population are also not, were not born in the Netherlands. So the discussion within the studios is very, I think, diverse in this sense. Why 2 competences are collaborating, and what was the other? Communicating. What was your question?
Well, I found collaboration especially an interesting one. Also in light of authorship, for instance.
Yes. Collaboration is very important to us, because we feel that what has to come in the first place is the discussion, looking for common grounds, sharing, and being able, as I said before, to put your place in the place of the other. So, and actually to perceive difference in opinions, but also in way of handling, with a respected and understanding manner, without oppression. So that's why collaboration is a kind of a basic competence within our curriculum. It's the only way to go on further. Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, sure.
It's also a manner of producing knowledge in a different way. And that's why I want to relate to what Nathalie said, because the production of knowledge is really kind of a base to change perception about power, about what is important and what is not important, how things happen, why choosing one way or another. So by collaboration, by putting together many opinions, you produce knowledge in a different manner.
Yes. And maybe, Nathalie, in the context of your many educational activities, which are also quite varied in terms of forms and methods, how do you encounter these, for instance, this aspect of collaboration or moving beyond single person authorship, that also in the setup of your own studio, why think tank is important, for instance? Why is that, for instance, important in light of this discussion on cultural and ethnic diversity in architecture education?
I think that's like a great point, because I have to say that, you know, most of our practice, most of our projects are always born out of collaboration. And when we create platforms, you know, such as lab readers or even the manual of anti-racist architecture, at some point is always with the hope of opening the discussion and being able to being like, you know, like a bigger crowd, not just to be there in numbers, but also, as Pnina was pointing out, it's about, you know, exchanging about this topic, learning from one another, acknowledging also kind of a limitation of our own knowledges, and be able also to kind of open the sources of knowledge and see also people who have been working with these different topics for their lifetime, that can really bring a change in the discussion. And going back also to your first part about also all the different kinds of pedagogy that we have been doing. So we are, of course, we're teaching in universities. We also do a lot of different kinds of workshops that can be with children, that can be also with people who are not architects, but also around the topic of architecture. And what we really also foster when we do that, and even in studios in university, is the role of collaboration. And I think it's also like echoes what Pnina also was talking about. I think, you know, this has really to be valued, because there was like this kind of fictional kind of image of the architect that has been really kind of protected for many years, with the idea that it's this kind of singular author, like a genius of some kind, that also, you know, comes with ideas, but really work alone, which again is a fiction, because if you go in the field, you can really see that it's all about collaboration from the first steps to the project to the end of the project. And I think the problem is like that is kind of lacking in some schools, like how studios is taught. It's always based also a lot about competition and about, again, like this kind of individual authorship. And I think what we really want to break, and what we try to do, like in all the different kind of platforms that we have, is again really push like collaborative or collective projects. So to some extent also it's about like learning from each other, but also when you work together, it's a really different kind of process than working alone. And I think it's, for me, like these discussions need to happen more often in the schools of architecture. And I'm happy to hear Pnina talk so much about it, because I've seen really different settings where this is not really discussed. And I think if we want to speak about change and really kind of update our ways of understanding the role of an architect, but also the training of an architect, we have to acknowledge that collaboration, again, should be at the core of all this.
Yes, yes.
If I may add something to this, is I think the basic notion of collaboration is that one understands oneself in relation to others. And you also understand others as you understand yourself. And when you are able to do that, that sounds a little bit Zen and Buddhistic. I know that it sounds not like hard science and architecture with a really big A. But I think this ability to put yourself in in another person's shoes is key to, I think, a design that makes a change and that is has a meaningful value to society. And I really agree with you, Nathalie. It's time to let go of the star architects and a kind of one narrative in architecture and to spread it and to take all indeed citizens with us in the design process.
And I think also like to kind of extend this question of exploding the bubble, which I really like. I think it's also to some extent acknowledge that in the process, maybe discomfort is okay too. Because I feel like also when we just think of, again, like this kind of fiction that was preserved of being, for example, the individual author or individual thinker, it's quite a protected position. And what I like about the collaborative part is, as you're saying, Pnina, is like this need to understand that, again, you're not alone, so understand different positions, discuss, exchange, learn from each other, listen to each other. So I think this process is very important. And to, when we speak, especially because now we're speaking of a very important topic, which is about, change and having kind of more inclusive learning spaces. And for that, I would say that to some extent, discomfort is good because we all need to challenge ourselves. And if we really want to change, this really needs to be pushed forward. Because I feel like it's tricky because I know that the word is quite strong, but I think when discomfort happens, that's when really you go to like kind of unexpected places. And when we speak of discomfort, we can also like what has to be challenged is the discomfort of so many that have been pushed out, that didn't have really a place of voices or didn't really feel related to all the kind of pedagogical spheres that we were created. So I think for now, it's a good moment to bring back this discomfort into our institution and have a place where by collaboration, we can take time to understand others.
Well, we got a global discomfort, right? I mean, that forced us into this format of discussion. And I'm very happy because otherwise I wouldn't have met you, Nathalie, probably in real life. So indeed, discomfort is it's a good matrix for change.
Yeah, and maybe then especially regarding to architecture education and for instance, the canon plays an important role in that. So the buildings we discuss, analyze, reproduce through design projects and so on. But of course, sometimes maybe also one-sided. In your manual of anti-racist architecture education, Nathalie, for instance, you also specifically addressed the problematic aspects of some of what are considered the highlights of modernism, postmodernism, deconstructivism, for instance, as maybe prime examples of architecture, but part of a larger disenfranchising context that is not addressed or left out. And I wonder, maybe as a question to both of you, how could we deal with reframing these type of projects, or at least understanding them in the larger context, and in light of this discussion we're having today, how to deal with that?
I think when you mention context, that's like a very important first step. And I think what we are learning is, history, like speaking of history is it's very complex because we know how history was built. And I think what is important to bring back, especially when we speak about all the references and all the kind of main discourses that again is so central in architecture pedagogy, is really kind of understanding the context that allowed these references to be so dominant. So I feel like, because there's a lot of discussion, and I'm thinking, for example, Achille Bembe says, some knowledges need to be even decommissioned to some extent. But he also says that we have to pluralize our networks. And for that, I feel like what's can be really interesting for me is not just pushing them out of the curriculum necessarily, but really studying them and understanding, again, like what was the context that allowed this to be so dominant. And I think like also Pnina at some point also you use a word as how to really kind of foster an environment that is about being able to be critical, and we all need to be critical of those references too. So to understand that, and after, of course, bring other knowledges and other resources into the discussion too. But I feel like, and when it goes to, so also to link to the beginning of your question, when we think about architecture, also what is tricky is that so for such a long time, we always have thought, or some people have thought, that architecture, especially buildings, are just buildings, right? There's always this kind of decontextualization, depoliticization of an object of architecture. The problem is like architecture, and also historically, has been a really strong tool of kind of rendering physically ideologies, because it's part of history, it's part of society. And especially when we think of modernism, and all the very important movement that not just really kind of set societies as they are now, but also really strong in terms of how we define and how we practice and how we teach architecture. They are kind of a central kind of moments in time. We have to understand that, and we have to understand that it's not really possible to, again, isolate, everything that has been done in the history of architecture. We really need to understand what are the social, political, economical kind of historical settings that allowed this to be in place, and what does it mean to.
Yeah. And how is that for you, Pnina? So interesting, maybe in this sort of very diverse context of staff and students, is there a space or time for these kind of discussions, or do references play a role in the setup in Tilburg?
Well, I mean, like in every big institute, you have structures that are laid, structures that you have to somehow follow. But since we are very small, we are in the margins, then we are allowed a lot of freedom, which we take in our own hands. And just to give an example, just today I had a talk. For the first year students, we have a program that is called philosophy. And it's really gonna tackle this issue of inclusiveness and how architecture relates to philosophy in this sense. So through the magnifying glass of the other, of including and diversity, and the architecture production in relation to that. And I think that's a very challenging course for students. So, because I really agree with you, Nathalie, architecture is a cultural construct, and it really reflects the time you are in and convictions a society has. So it cannot be different than what it is, because it's anchored in a certain time and a certain understanding of what the world around us is. And I think the fact that we are moving towards we are already in the process of a very digital, diverse society, that inevitably will be of influence in the architectural production and the curricula of school. I mean, you can't imagine a student today of architecture that cannot kind of deal with a CAD program. That is something I think that doesn't exist anymore. So I mean, just look 20 years ago, that wasn't the issue. So there are certain processes that inevitably hack education and hijack it also sometimes, if you want it or you don't want it, but that's a kind of a reality. And actually at the academy we are welcoming it. We don't resist these changes. So in this way you can also deal with it better than, you know, say, oh no, this is something architects don't do. And I find it also very difficult, because I find the architectural community afraid of changes, afraid of new roles, afraid of a lot of things that happen. Very conservative in many cases. What I was very happy to hear, because there was not so long ago, in Europe you have the EAAE, it's an organization of all architectural schools, and the last Dean Summit, we had an amendment of how architectural schools should kind of redesign their curriculum, or a kind of, a notion or something that we want. And then the sustainable targets were part of it. So I'm very happy about that. I don't know if that will happen and how fast that will happen, because these are very, very slow processes. But at least there is a tendency. So yeah, but kind of a traditional attitude, that's a big problem, I think, within architecture and architectural education. Maybe because the processes are so long.
When we see the way we teach, like, I feel it's always amazing to see the really, again, I'm saying that in general, so I'm not speaking of your school, but like very small changes in a way along the years, which, it really has been protected in this way compared to other fields that really kind of responds more to the kind of contemporary settings and contemporary kind of energies or events that happened around. And I think, and as you were saying, like, so of course there's like, what's interesting is like especially after last summer, we are really kind of in the midst of like, you know, really exposing this conversation, trying to make them core of different institutions. But I think what we really need to push forward, and I think also it goes back to the comment of architecture being very conservative, which it is acknowledging too that, you know, for now architecture hasn't been a very inclusive space. And I think when we go to different architecture schools, this is very visible in many different ways. And really to change that, it's a full set of efforts that has to be done, because of course it's not just about numbers, because it's really about how can we really create and foster like a real platform that is really inclusive, where people have their spaces, where people have their own voices and can help to kind of shape what architecture is going to be tomorrow, Or for that regard, I feel what architecture is already is, and that's a problem too, is like, you know, there's like a big set of different already practices and people who have different discourses around it. But the problem is like it always has been peripheral and it's very difficult to bring those voices in. And I think to really make a change in, especially in institution, is we really have to address, again, not just numbers, but how we teach architecture, what is the center of our curriculum, what type of knowledges, how do we define, again, as we were speaking, you know, the profession and practice of an architect, and how to be more, again, sensible to like different ways of thinking and practicing, and acknowledge that for now, those spaces were not inclusive in that way. So I really hope that all this kind of call for discussion will be followed by, again, like I'm speaking in a general context, but a real call for action. And also, I think acknowledging limitation is very important. And to that extent, it means also bringing other people in, maybe that, again, have been left out, and also valuing the work of those people too, because again, it's like when for me, like my fear is, as I was saying, that is just, it becomes just a question of data or a question of representation. And also that it's become appropriated by others and oversimplified. And I'm thinking, for example, like Silvia Rivera Cusiconqui, she speaks a lot about it. And, you know, she speaks about the fear, for example, of like a lot of ancestral knowledge that are just kind of now, because it becomes a trend, are being like taken by certain institutions, oversimplified, because then they become slogans, and then it becomes something that try to make your institution more attractive in a way, and then dilutes all the kind of real knowledge and real kind of, again, call for action or change, or what we can really learn about all these kind of different references, resources, and knowledges. So I feel like it's, yeah, I really hope that when we speak of change, this change can be really sustained, again, in the long term, but also in a very kind of layered way, that we understand that when we need change is, again, it's not just about representation or numbers or name on papers. It's really about building this real kind of place that is inclusive, critical, emancipatory for as much as, you know, for everyone, of course.
Yeah. And I don't know if we can speculate on how to do that. You, for instance, also write about, of course, we have talked about one part of institutional framework as the references, the curricula, the syllabus, but there's also, of course, the other part, boards of directors, hiring committees, and so on, that maybe are also a part of this, sustaining this change. I don't know how you experience that in your daily practices.
It's challenging. I can let Pnina start.
Well, I don't have such a problem with that. I mean, it takes time, and you have to be aware of it, that you are confronting people with thoughts that never occurred to them. So in this sense, maybe because I'm maybe a bit older, that's my diverse component in this discussion. You need to have patience with these people and explain over and over and over again what is the need for that. And of course, the activist in you, in me, so we want to fight, to go on barricade, but sometimes a discussion is very important. So always bring the discussion in, always keep the space open, also to opinions that you really reject, that you really dislike. I think it's good if people express them, then you can do something with that. But because when you leave them out of the discussion, you kind of put your head in the sand and ignore it, and that doesn't help. So be embrace actually every rejection. Keep your enemies close to you, as they say. I think it's very important for people to be able to, actually you have to create a very safe environment for everybody to express their opinions, likes and dislikes. Because when I was invited to this discussion, I thought to myself, well, what is like the first thing that was really, really weird to me? And I think it was in architecture history when I was taught about the primitive hut. It's ridiculous, you know. How can you have a stamp of something as primitive when it's so, you know, it takes knowledge on how to build it, why to do it, it has a context, and from that derives like the modern architecture. So, but it's good to have it, and it's good if people kind of talk about it, because then you can show some objection to it and change the course. So that is one thing. And the second thing is that we try to invite to the school people that kind of perceive architecture from another point of view. So we have also a series of lecture when we particularly invite people to tell another story about architecture. So we will have soon, I have to, Alexander Stanicic, he will tell something, he's from Serbia, and he will tell about the fall of the, after, how Belgrade can cope with copes with the memorialization after the bombardment of the NATO in 1999. So, I mean, it's another voice, it's another story about a place. It's maybe not, yeah, I think memory and place and victims and aggressors, they're part of the inclusive story of architecture. We have invited people to tell us about public space from the point of view of immigrants, women and children. That's also a different perspective of public space, and so on and so on. So a part of it is to include these stories into the scope of the studies. Although they are not proper architecture, I mean, they're not talking about the building. So yeah, and
that's
how
good.
it's made. Yeah,
that's good. I really agree with your point about discussing, and I feel, you know, when we speak about this topic, we have to acknowledge that, again, you spoke about collaboration, but I think it's important to know that it's as much a collective process as an individual process. But also we have to learn that what we are, again, like critiquing and what we want to change is it's a systemic problem. So it's not, so the problem is like also we, and I agree that also take, you know, some time and some effort, and that's why conversation is so important, dialogue is so important, but it's not just about the person. Like I'm thinking of a text, for example, of Tuck and Young when they speak about the settler move to innocence, and how, you know, certain person, when we raise this topic, suddenly it becomes all about, you know, yourself, and it's like very defensive, right? But again, when we speak about this, what we really want to attack is the systemic approach to that. So it takes some time for all of us to also understand, again, like as I was saying before, like our own limitation, our limits of discomfort. We spoke about that, comfort versus discomfort. And also understand that, also speaking of vocabulary, I think language is very important. And even if certain terms can seem really kind of strong for some person, or, you know, they don't really understand the importance of it, we need to understand, and we need to learn why those terms are so important and why people are using them. What is the history? What is the erasure? What is the oppression? What is the fights that goes behind those terms? And that's why it's so important also to speak about them. I'm speaking, you know, especially of all the right, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, of course, anti-racism, anti-ableism, anti-homophobia, and so on. And I think it will take time. but also it's a call of, I think, for everyone to kind of try to kind of break a little bit those boundaries and preconceptions, because in all the different contexts where we are, where we grew up, we all, again, it's society comes with a set of preconception on a lot of different topics, and I think again it's all about trying to take the time to learn, really to learn and to listen to others and to understand again, what does it mean and why is it so important at that time to kind of try to fight for change.
Yes, thank you. Maybe towards the end of the talk, we have not received any questions yet, but if there are any, feel free to post them in the Q&A box on Zoom. I was also maybe wondering, because of course we all went through architecture education also, and now you are both teaching in architecture education. Have you seen a change from over time? Are you already starting to see change, or experience differences between different places that you have worked or encountered?
I think what we always saw is the change within the students. Like, I feel like from the beginning, when we started to teach, all the really critical questions and kind of awareness were already there within the students and discussing with them. Because again, it's like, and we feel also a lot of frustration. And I mean, we feel this frustration too, but also coming from students and especially, during everything that happened last year, is to see how the world, ourselves, society is affected, and how then when you enter the school, and especially the studio and all these topics kind of disappear. For me, like for us, as a team, we always tried to challenge that. So we think that studio, we really believe also in thinking pedagogy more as an exchange. So we think that we learn as much as I hope the students learn, but in that way, we are here also to kind of communicate and exchange on those topics. And I feel especially last year, we changed a lot of our ways of teaching, especially seminars, where it was really about reacting what was happening in the news. So if an event happened, we would always take time in class to discuss about it and try to bring references. And again, how can it relate to architecture? How can it relate to our role and responsibility as architect? And always try to have a place and a space to kind of link this really kind of contemporary setting and daily struggles, daily questions, daily thoughts with what we can do with that in studio, and what does it mean? The same in studio, in seminar, what does it mean as an architect or as a future architect? And what can we do with that?
And then Pnina, maybe from your perspective. The mute button.
I always forget to unmute myself. I'm not used to mute myself, so that's well, the students are more and more in lead, and I really find it very. I welcome this. I think that's the big change, and I think when and that I welcome it, because I really think when you get a kind of a proper architecture education, you become also proactive, and part of it is taking the action into your hands and not wait for the school to come and tell you this is needed to be taught, or you have to look there, or you have to look it up there. So it was very funny, because a few of my students were taking part in a kind of a landscape triennale in Brabant. That's something that happens, of course, every 3 years. And they targeted inclusiveness as in how people that are disabled can kind of experience high architectural interventions. They can't at the moment because they cannot approach it, because if you cannot walk, you can't get or into a building or walk on a bridge, or so that was really interesting. And you see that indeed the structure or the system opposed to it. So a mayor in a city say, yeah, but there are many different ways to experience a building, etc., etc. But I liked it because they really pinpointed it and, yeah, touched a very soft spot in someone's, I think, perception. So, yeah, students, empower the students. That's what education is all about, isn't that?
I think that's one agreement that we come to conclude now. We've received also a question from Tom Hunter, who posted the question if it should be a normal part of the curriculum for architecture schools to teach ethics. That's because typically it's not taught to think of the ethical consequences of their designs. So should that be part of the architecture curriculum?
I would say if you are interested, go for it. Don't wait for somebody to offer it to you. So
be proactive, like you
as
just said.
Search and destroy, you know.
I like that. I like that. But yeah, I feel also like, well, I'm all for like kind of exploding this bubble of just looking at architecture, first of all, as a building, because I think I think that's fantastic about the field too. And I think that's what, you know, for us is really kind of exciting in thinking also, how can we reframe what it's already happening, but how can we reframe what the practice is going to be tomorrow, and how all that is happening here can really kind of feed what will be coming out, and hopefully, you know, for better, of course. And I think like this kind of really wide definition of what an architect can be is also like a really strong tool for all of us, because then also it's more like, I always see that as a call for appropriation, because it means to some extent, you know, if you really want to address like some very, you know, more political or activist issues, you can, of course, there's a space for that. Of course, if you're more interested in different types of practicing, there's also ways for that too. So I feel there's so many different kind of gradient in how you can approach those questions. But of course, as a personal standpoint, I feel that, you know, speaking of ethics and speaking about it is so central to that when we speak just about architecture and specifically about build projects. Architecture has always strong repercussion. You know, we always say that, but it's true. You know, if you have bad architecture, for the people, we build for others. And in that regard, we have this responsibility. So also I feel like it's also very important to speak about those terms too. For me, architects have a responsibility, because this is going to change an environment, is going to change a context, is going to affect neighborhoods, communities, urban kind of networks. It's also, as we were saying already, it's linked in different kinds of ideologies. So again, depending on which project, it will have different kind of repercussions, because again, we work for clients, or if we work for estates, but we work with programs. So nothing is really neutral when you think about it. So I feel it's really important always to acknowledge that and to kind of really be aware of that. And everything has repercussion when you build it in the environment, and really have to take the responsibility on that.
Yes, thank you for your answer, and also both of you, thank you for participating in this session. I think it wraps it up nicely. And also thank you all for joining us either on Zoom or YouTube. The session will also you'll be able to rewatch the session later on. And next week we will have another talk talk number 4 about querying architecture. It will also be on a Tuesday between 6 to 7 Central European Standard Time. So I think this is it. Thank you again very much, Nathalie and Pnina, for your participation in this series and your incredibly useful insights in furthering diversity and inclusivity in architecture. Thank you.